The Rise and Shine podcast series is made possible by the generous support of Bonnie Vozar of Chicago, Illinois.
It is a land of deep magic. It is the Narnia of the Jewish people. Israel never ceased to spark and ignite the imagination, the longing, the yearning into every fabric of Jewish personal, familial, and communal life.
This is Rise and Shine, a podcast that offers timeless wisdom and uplifting meditations to fill your heart, feed your soul, and start your day on a positive note. Here is Adrienne Gold Davis.
Hello to my loyal Rise and Shine listeners around the world. Today's episode is not the usual 10-minute format. Instead, it's a longer, more in-depth interview format with an extraordinary man. Dr. Zohar Raviv, the internationally recognized Jewish thought leader, educator, and speaker, serves as International Vice President of Educational Strategy for Taglit Birthright Israel, as well as being now the scholar in residence for Momentum Unlimited. So over the past few weeks this fall, he has mesmerized hundreds upon hundreds of Jewish women from around the world on our Momentum trips. And while you can hear from him in brevity on the Momentum Yom app, this is your chance to get up close and personal with one of the greatest Jewish minds of our generation. Today, I get the fabulous opportunity to discuss a classic article he wrote that's been widely celebrated. We're privileged that he's going to help us unpack it. Welcome to you, Zohar.
Hi, Adrienne. As always, pleasure to be with you and with our listeners.
Thank you so much for joining me again. Listen, this is a complex thing that you discussed in this article. So I'm going to begin, if it's okay, with a piece of a quote that you wrote towards the beginning of the article. And it's basically discussing the differing landscapes of perception as they relate to Israel. So I'm going to read the quote, and then you're going to help us unpack it, okay? All right. General perceptions of Israel usually traverse all landscapes, imagined, covenantal, remembered, lived, and envisioned, albeit with varying emphasis or breadths of context. For example, contemporary Jews living throughout the world and native Israelis see Israel in a very different way. Without denying the generalization offered here, it is arguably true that diaspora Jews often view Israel through romantic, religiously oriented, or politically induced lenses, often reflective of the imagined and remembered lands, whereas native Israelis often tend to set aside these views in favor of achievements and challenges of a modern state, a national homeland, and the country of the residents. This is a complex statement. Can you help us unpack these landscapes that you're talking about here and why we women in the Jewish diaspora need to understand and be able to differentiate from these particular points of view?
With pleasure. I'm delighted that you picked this piece for our discussion today, because it is a piece that resonates even more tellingly today in my mind. Mm-hmm. And as you've heard me say many times before, in today's day and age, context becomes far more valuable a currency than content alone. So it is my intention here to give the context of the perception of Israel through a conceptual historiography of Israel in the overall Jewish mindset. And before we set on differentiating between those five landscapes, I want, with your permission, to make a comment that, in my opinion, is very, very important.
Please, of course.
A commitment to the religious aspect of Judaism does not necessarily mean that one has to be religious in order to accept the narrative of our past as a narrative. In other words, oftentimes you and I, and we've discussed this before, You asked me once, but Zohar, what do we do when we talk about Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Jacob, and someone comes to me and says, I'm not a religious person, I don't believe in God, ergo, what do you want from me? And my response here is that whether or not one has a commitment to the religious aspect of Judaism should not affect their commitment to the narrative of Judaism.
No, I'm not getting that. Try that one again.
What I'm saying is that whether someone accepts that Abraham was an authentic figure, or that the Exodus from Egypt actually happened, or that Moses actually climbed a mount that is called Mount Sinai, whether one accepts that or not as a historic event has nothing to do with the fact that the story of Abraham, the story of Sarah, the story of Isaac, and the story of Moses and Mount Sinai are part and parcel of our historical narrative for 3,000 years. In other words, this story is a historical fact.
Okay, I think I understand. Basically, what you're saying to me is it's not contingent in belief in the Bible, but that if this has been the story, our narrative, if you will, for the last over 3,000 years, to deny it, regardless of what the theology is ludicrous. It's denying part of your own story.
Exactly that. In other words, that is our story, and we have different venues of associating with that story that transcend religion alone. That was my main point.
Okay, that I get. That I understand. All right. So with that aside, and this makes it much more inclusive because, as you said before, and we have talked about this, there are people who will not accept Israel as part of the fabric of the Jewish people. In fact, the most popular thing you hear today is that I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm just anti-Zionism. But there is no way to separate the Zionist narrative from the Jewish people, regardless of...
that is exactly the point that I've made in another podcast with you, as it happened. And here I want to tackle this issue through this conceptual historiography of Israel in the overall Jewish mindset and narrative. So let us start with the first conceptual landscape, and that is Israel as an imagined land. And here, when we go to the biblical narrative, we find something quite fascinating, and that is that the laws pertaining to the land of Israel, which are very meticulous laws, and are delivered in great detail to the Israelites through the mediating agency of Moses, all those laws are being given to the Israelites while they are not in Israel.
Okay.
But rather in Sinai. And in that respect, when God says to Moses, beware that the land which I take you onto is not like the land of Egypt from whence you came. Rather, it is a land whereupon God's eye is set upon from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. The biblical narrative now distinguishes between the land from whence the Israelites came and the land to which they are about to enter, eventually after 40 years. That land for the Israelites in Sinai is an imagined land because they get a whole scope of commandments about it, but they are not experiencing it firsthand. It is a land of deep magic. It is the Narnia of the Jewish people.
Okay, so wait a minute. So even those that didn't manage to enter Israel, including Moshe, had this imagined land. It was the yearning, that was what they were moving towards, but they'd never seen it. So it could only exist as an imaginative land. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. In other words, the entire mechanism of the association with Israel for the Hebrews and for the Hebrew nation was an imagined process that took place within the community itself, irrespective of the land which they had not yet entered.
Okay, that I understand.
In that respect, the Exodus from Egypt functioned as a rendezvous point between the soul of the Jew and the land which the Jew is about to enter. There needed to be some sort of a meeting place in the inner faculties of the people in order to get to that land and become part of that land, which now will become the second land, and that is Israel is a covenantal land.
Okay. Now, covenantal means what in this regard?
Once the Israelites enter the land of Israel, Israel is now transformed from an imagined land into an experienced land, which is covenantal by nature. And by covenantal by nature, I mean that Israel is not perceived as a land upon which Jews live, but rather it is perceived as an active partner in the covenantal relationship between the people of Israel and the God of Israel. It is a Jewish land, not a land for Jews.
Wow. So there is this, it's very interesting because we often talk at Momentum about this concept of spirituality, of the human being a compound creature of both soul and body. And from what I'm hearing you say, you cannot separate out the soul and body of the land of Israel from the Jewish people.
Exactly. You know what Rabbi Joshua Heschel said? He said, memory without action is a ghost. Action without memory is a corpse.
Oh, yes. Yes,
And-
indeed. That's true. Okay. So now we're in this covenantal land, and we accept and understand that the land is not a land for Jews, that it is a Jewish land. So the two need to join hands, if you will. And that covenant is us using our bodies in order to fulfill the covenant of our souls.
That, and more so, us using the land as an active partner in that covenantal paradigm. And I'll give you 3 wonderful examples, Adrienne.
Please.
In the book of Leviticus chapter 25, that pertains to the laws of Shemitah, that we know them as Shemitah, meaning letting the land rest every seventh year. Interestingly enough, the word Shemitah, letting go, appears only once in the Bible, and that is later in the book of Deuteronomy. But when the laws of Shemitah appear, the word Shemitah does not appear, but rather this is what the Torah says to us. And the Lord spoke unto Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When you come into the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord.
So the land
Of Israel is accepted to keep the Sabbath every 7th year. And if the Jewish people don't allow it to keep the Sabbath and rest, the land will puke them out, kick them out of the land.
Wow. So the land
Okay.
almost is like our body.
The land, that's what I'm saying. It is an active partnership between human, Adam in Hebrew, and land, Adama in Hebrew, which come from the same root, okay? And the Adam and the Adama are now partners in the covenantal paradigm with divinity.
Oh, that's
example number 1.
exquisite. Okay.
Example number 2 may even surprise you further, Adrienne. When the Israelites enter the land, they are commanded also to plant trees in order to grow fruit and have food. And look what the commandment says about the covenantal land, about planting trees. Okay? And when you shall come into the land and shall have planted all manners of trees for food, then you shall count the fruit thereof as forbidden. In the Hebrew, uncircumcised. 3 years it shall be uncircumcised unto you and shall not be eaten. In other words, the Hebrew word orla, which in the biblical narrative pertains to the male foreskin, pertains to the heart that does not understand divinity in full, pertains to a mouth that does not speak the word of God truthfully, and pertains to the tree of the fruit of the tree of in Israel, which is rendered uncircumcised until it goes through the covenantal rite in the temple, and then on the 5th year it can be edible. That's a second example.
Let me ask you one thing. Is this part of the root of the reason why many traditional women don't cut their kids' hair for the first 3 years? Is there a relationship there with if you have to allow the tree to grow wildly for those first 3 years, and there's this idea that, you don't cut your kids' hair or even teach them Torah for the first 3 years. Could there be a relationship there?
A fascinating juxtaposition. I do not know the answer to that, but you can rest assured that I'm going to look for that answer after our podcast.
Make sure you call me. Okay, keep going.
Will. And the third example, which is even more remarkable, the land of Israel is expected and demanded to take an active role in one of the most foundational value statements of Judaism, and that is the act of tzedakah.
Mm-hmm.
The land of Israel and the Jews are commanded, when you plow your land, leave the corners of your field untouched for the poor, for the orphan, for the widow, for the destitute. If you harvest your land and a bunch of your weeds fall on the ground, do not go to pick them up, leave them. In other words, the land itself is now taking an active part in the covenantal right of tzedakah, therefore rendering it an equal partner in this eternal triangle of people, God, land within the evolution of the Jewish identity.
Listen, answer me a question, Zohar. How is it that, you make this so plain and you are also making it plain without the contingency of having to be ritually observant or having your questions or doubts about the historical relevance of the Bible or so on? Why do we not talk about this covenant with the land when we are defending our right to be in the land?
First of all, I believe that one of the reasons why we are engaging in such conversations, you and I, and with many, many others on different podiums and stages all over the world, is exactly that, to put a dent in this unfortunate myopic view of the Jewish narrative and expand the canvas of Jewish appreciation, both for Jews and non-Jews alike. So they understand that the relationship between the people of Israel and the land of Israel is not only ancient, but also intricate, complex, and fascinating. And that was the reason for this article to begin with.
Okay. Unbelievable. Keep going.
So the covenantal land kept its vitality until the first and second exiles that started in the 6th century BCE and then continued in 70 CE by the Romans. And here we find that Israel is now transformed from a covenantal land into a remembered land. As many, many Jews now are forced to live in exile or in the diaspora, the physical presence of Israel, or better yet, its physical presence of absence in the Jewish communities, is now compensated by reintroducing Israel on a mythical level and entrenching its memory and vitality into every aspect of Jewish life. So our food.
Yeah. The benching, the saying grace after meals, but also I'm thinking that, this is really, we're a remembered land when we're saying next year in Jerusalem, as we have been saying since we left. Okay.
Exactly. And this memory of a land becomes a fuel that ignites and reignites the Jewish yearning to return to this covenantal land, to return to this relationship. But throughout the centuries and throughout the 2,000 years or even more of this diasporic reality, which continues until this very moment where, as we speak, obviously it had seen turns, turbulences, shifts of focus as humanity progresses, as ideas about divinity and about nationalism and about states change. So does the memory of Israel change and manifests in different ways, from those who say that our identity as Jews will not be whole until we return,
Okay.
until we relive that memory. And those who lean and say, well, Israel now lives on a mythical level. I accept it as my homeland, although it is no longer the land which is my home. But the important thing is to remember that Israel never ceased to spark and ignite the imagination, the longing, the yearning, and has infused itself into every fabric of Jewish personal, familial, and communal life around the diasporas of the world as part and parcel of their identity, and the desire to return to it has become another element in people's Jewish identity throughout those 2,000 or more years.
The desire to return to it, but not necessarily the commitment to return to it. Why do you think there's a disconnect there? If we are mostly a remembered land now, and we have the ability to have it be a lived in covenantal land, why is there such dissonance between being in the diaspora and living there, do you think?
Why is the Babylonian Talmud far bigger than the Israelite Talmud?
Why?
Because the majority of the scholars lived at the time lived in Babylon and not in Israel. In other words,
Also,
side of the, I mean, we have to be also realistic and pragmatic when we explore the phenomenology of Jewish life and not just the mythology of Jewish life. And the phenomenology of Jewish life says, look, when Jews lived in other parts of the world for many, many, many generations and succeeded in entrenching themselves into those social structures, some better, some less, it's not that easy to just get up and leave. In every generation, there were those masters and notable men and women who said, no, we have to act upon that memory and return. But that desire to return and the way that return has now started to fascinate the national imagination of the Jewish people will have to wait until the late 19th century with the introduction of the Zionist movement in Europe, which relies heavily on the three landscapes that we have just discussed. It accepts Israel as an imagined land. It definitely recognizes Israel as a covenantal land vis-a-vis its intrinsic relationship to the Jewish people, and of course works out of the reality of Israel as a remembered land, but now translates that memory into a realpolitik operation that now looks at the envisioned state of Israel as a member of the modern world based on the right of Jews to return to their homeland, and also based on a realization that Jews need to be a sovereign people like any other people on earth. And that is already a modern, much more Western frame of mind, which will inform the Zionist movement in all of its branches until 1948, where the state of Israel is established. And now we moved from Israel as a remembered land to Israel as a lived land.
You know, it's exquisite when you think about it. So many people imagine that Zionism began with Herzl, began, in at the end of the last century and so on. Actually, we're already 2 centuries ago. And rather, it was the third landscape all along. It had nothing, this is another misunderstood or unknown, because without the landscapes you put forward before, people might imagine that Zionism as we know it today came out of nowhere or was just a response to persecution. And I think there's a tremendous danger in seeing Israel as a response to persecution as opposed to the covenantal homeland that you've explained it to be.
Absolutely. And we've discussed this at length at another opportunity. And I mentioned there that Israel is not a project of survival, but a project of revival.
Oof, that's a
And
beautiful line. Just say it again one more time.
Israel is not a project of survival, but a project of revival.
It's gorgeous. Okay, sorry, go ahead. I keep interrupting you. Go on.
Israel is not about running away from anti Semites, it is about running towards redemption.
Oh my gosh.
It is, and that's the paradigm shift that needs to happen once you contextualize and understand that the Zionist movement is merely a third step in the greater canopy of the Zionist civilizational ideal that had started 4,000 years earlier.
All right, so that brings us to now, to the lived land. You often say, another very powerful phrase, that Israel is not an ideal state, but rather it is a state of ideals. And that now, after what you've explained, this really deepens my understanding of that statement. So what's next?
So when Israel became a lived landscape, obviously that sense of triumph and jubilation and catharsis was also immediately accompanied by a great sense of what now? How do we translate 4,000 years of history and the intricate and pressing demands of the modern world into a tapestry of ideals that both celebrate our revival on the one hand as a Jewish and democratic sovereign state, and on the other hand, allow us to become a member in the family of nations in a democratic, modern, and liberal formation. The juxtaposition of these two has presented itself as both the source of enchantment and intrigue in the Israeli dynamics, and also a source of great pressure, tensions, and arguments. Because on the one hand, you want to call Israel a Jewish state, but on the other hand, that very understanding of Judaism is no longer confined into the somewhat myopic religious aspect alone. On the one hand, you want Israel to be democratic, but it resides in a profound tension as a member in the family of nations, as a Jewish state. What does that say about non-Jewish citizens of that land and of that state, which, by the way, was established again, not as a state for Jews, but as David Ben-Gurion declared, we hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in the land of Israel, henceforth to be named the State of Israel. So what does that mean? The plethora of ideals and their attempted realizations is a laboratory for any Jew who truly wants to explore the evolution of the State of Israel vis-a-vis the burden of its memory and the aspiration for its future.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, all you have to do is look around in Israel and just see the multiple parties, that notion of 2 Jews and 12 opinions and so on. But to live with that complexity in a modern world where, as you put it, everybody surfs but nobody dives, no wonder they don't understand us, because nobody seems to have the intellectual faculty to understand the complexity of what it is to have this land that you're talking about. No wonder we can't express ourselves properly. No wonder we keep losing that PR war, if you will, because there's too much depth here. You can't just sort of slide over this in a superficial way. And I don't know what the answer is there. I just...
I told you once that, in my opinion, the true mandate of an educator is not to become the dispenser of certainties, but a blissful irritation to people's minds. And I believe that that mandate is more important today than ever. And I will forever believe that there are enough people out there who truly want to examine things in context, revisit preconceived assumptions, remassage their preconceived exclamation points into question marks again, and enter into a dialogue that will hopefully benefit both sides. Had I not believed in the presence of such people, I would relinquish my mandate and authority as an educator. So I hope that our listeners are among those who are willing to hear and expand their horizons and either send us accolades or critique, but at least wrestle with the ideas that were presented here and then come and deliver their truth and their viewpoints as part of a rich tapestry of a dialogue that has always taken place in among the Jewish people from the imagined landscape and until the envisioned one, which we're all part of.
Oof. You said the word wrestle with. Perhaps some of our listeners don't understand or know that the word Israel itself really comes from the notion of wrestling with these kind of concepts of God or of divinity. Wrestling, it requires a kind of agility. Do you believe, you must believe, you just said that you have to believe that it's possible. So what do you say to an education system, especially a post-secondary college education system, that has effectively thrown their hands up in the air around this kind of complexity?
First of all, it's a very troubling reality that some of the most notable landscapes that were supposed to be the bastion of intellectual curiosity, honesty, moral clarity, have to certain degrees relinquished the mandate that has been bestowed on them by people who invested in them to serve our society as such bastions of morality and clarity. But again, I believe that the true encounter and the true impact at the end of the day happens between human beings, one-on-one. In that respect, I'm very much a Buberian in my philosophy. I believe that the meeting place between two minds, if done appropriately, can affect the minds of 1,000. And I pray that the meeting of our minds will affect the minds of our listeners in such a way that it will at least spark their curiosity to look beyond the obvious into the adjacent possible, however intimidating that possible may be.
Amen. Amen. So I guess that means you're willing to have another mental wrestling match with me.
Always.
Excellent. Excellent. Get your calendar over and we're going to book it. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much for your time and energy, and to all of you listening. This has been as jaw-dropping and confounding and as exquisite to me as it is to you. So let us all merit to continue to wrestle and to look forward to a kind of truth that will get us deep diving and not spending our time surfing. You should be well, and I can't wait to the next conversation.
Me as well, Adrienne. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Rise and Shine. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Momentum Podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join Adrienne again next time for more timeless wisdom and uplifting meditations that fill your heart, feed your soul, and start your day on a positive note.
This podcast was made possible by the generous support of Bonnie Vozar of Chicago, Illinois. Spread the wisdom. Inspire Jewish individuals around the globe by supporting Momentum's podcasts. To sponsor, contact podcast@momentumunlimited.org. You're listening to a Momentum podcast. For unlimited inspiration, wisdom, and empowerment, visit momentumunlimited.org.